Thanks for staying with us. In Mombasa, police are investigating the shooting of a businessman outside his house on Monday night. That's last night. The businessman, who was identified as Shege Gitao, was gunned down at around 9:30 p.m. Police say at least 8 bullets were sprayed into his car as he was getting to the gate of his home. According to Mombasa Urban OCPD Lucas Ogara, an unidentified man was caught up in the crossfire and hit by a stray bullet, injuring him. The gunmen are believed to have confronted the businessman before spraying him with bullets. And thanks for staying with us. Today is the launch of the World Bank-funded Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project, which will be implemented by the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum and its parastatals, namely Kenya Power and the Rural Electrification Authority. It shall serve 14 currently unreached counties in the country. Patrick Igunza is there as we speak. Let's listen into what's happening there.
Today's project is on 14 counties. It's a very unique project because there are some of our areas in the country that do not have access to the grid, and they will not have access to the grid in the recent future, simply because of the huge resources that would be required to extend transmission lines to places like Madera, which are very far off. So this is a unique solution which makes sure that even those people will still enjoy the electricity that we are enjoying here by use of mini-grids. I said at the moment we have several of those main towns like Madera, Marsabit, Moyale, Wajir, Lodwar. They are served with mini-grids. And what we mean by mini-grids is a grid network that exists as a standalone, that is not connected to the rest of the grid. And therefore what we intend to do is to replicate such mini-grids in many other areas so that most of the people in those counties will be served with the mini-grids. And these mini-grids are mainly standalone generators, and which we are going to do a hybrid system of the generators, wind, because there is a lot of wind resource in those areas, and solar, so that we also minimize the usage of petroleum products.
But this one specifically is solar powered?
This specifically is mini-grid. There is also the solar component, and there is also the hybriding, which I have talked about. And the solar component is mainly the product of solar that will be supplied to the homes, like solar lanterns, solar lamps, all those items that otherwise use solar for as a source of energy. Yes.
What is the funding mechanism, and who are the other partners?
No, at the moment we have just had the World Bank. It's 150 million USD. It is a long-term concessional loan. You know, this is the most cost-effective loan with even a very long, what we call a grace period. So it is what we call the best sources of financing.
So World Bank has put in 150 million USD.
Yes.
And how much are you expecting to spend towards the project?
No, we are expecting to spend the same. We have gone through what we call an analysis of what we need in the proposals that we have and what we need to spend. So that 150 million is expected to be in various components I talked about.
That is Patrick Igunza as we listened into the launch of the World Bank funded Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project. This is being implemented by the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum and its parastatals, which are Kenya Power and the Rural Electrification Authority. This particular project shall serve 14 unreached counties in the country, and we'll be giving you more details on that story as and when we get them. Back here in studio, we are continuing with our discussion on news shaping the day, and in particular, we're zeroing in on the chances of an October 17th poll. We know that there are issues surrounding the Kim's kit supplier, OT Morpho, saying that they will not be ready by the 17th of October. And of course, talking about the detailed conclusions of the Supreme Court, which are not out yet, and also talking about whether or not the Supreme Court might require it to move the results transmission system to Kenya, which they say will mean that holding a fresh poll within 60 days, constitutional deadline, will be technically impossible. Gabriel, I'm starting with you. This development, OT Morpho saying that to reinstall a new RTS system as well as 45,000 kits is a lot of work which they cannot do within the constitutional provisions.
And I understand. You see, there's one thing, and I've had so many people talk about this, but about the 17th of October date. And the truth of the matter, that date is not written on stone. That can actually be changed. It can be moved back, can be brought forward, we can play around with it. But where we cannot cross the line is a 60-day, allowance given by the Constitution. So there are things that may come, Lillian, that we may not be able to work around, like, the OT Morpho saying they need time to reset their equipment. And it's, you're talking about 40,000 something gadgets that needs to be reset. Yeah, that need to be reset, that need to ensure they are in good working order, that need to be tested again to ensure that they are able to carry data as they did. So there is that, it has to be a concern. It has to be a concern. And I think they are going to drive that agenda to IBC. And, they are going to tell them, this is just the reality of technology. So I think that can push the date. That can be, can push the date. The other thing that's coming into the fore, and I think, as parents we need to be alive to this fact, is that we have our children who are sitting for these examinations. So we also need to play around and see that their studies and their examinations are not affected. Having said that, we also need to also be alive to the fact that most of our polling stations are within academic institutions. So how do we play this out? What do we do? Okay, we have to juggle and ensure that as much as we want this election to happen, which must happen, given the fact that it is a constitutional requirement, we also must make sure that we are not entering to ensure that we are doing much disservice to our students. But you've raised that question that must be answered. I think that date can be pushed, given the fact that technology will demand.
Simeha, Gabriel says the date can be moved, that it would make more sense to move the date. NASA, on the other hand, are saying no OT Morpho, no Al Ghurair. I'm actually talking about the possibility of giving this tender to a local firm. But then again, looking at the school calendar, we are also seeing Education CS Fred Matiang'i saying there's no way that the calendar will change. They will not alter the given dates, and therefore we find ourselves in a bit of a quagmire once again.
No, I don't think it's a quagmire. We have important processes always going on around the country. Of course, some more important than others, and some more disruptive of our lives than others. And it's part of life. It's part of building society. This thing of education or examinations, I really think has been overplayed as an excuse. It's not impossible that examinations can take place even as we plan to have a presidential election. In fact, luckily, just of one position, not all the 6 positions. It is not impossible that as a nation we can plan that. Secondly, let us not speak as if this is the first time the education sector would face some kind of disruption. The education sector has faced worse disruptions in the past, and people who are making the loudest noises have kept quiet when teachers are on strike on end, when we talk about equipment and so on promised to primary school kids that is not arriving until I don't know how many years after, when we talk about generally the curriculum failing the system. Because we've had this discussion again and again and again, even the ministry itself acknowledging and saying that, okay, we are reviewing the curriculum, we'll issue a new curriculum. So in other words, I'm saying we have had worse disruptions to our children's lives than an exam being postponed for a day or 2. Because again, it doesn't mean that this is cast in stone, that if we say it must start on 12th and end on 30th, that must be. It can be postponed for a day or 2 to give way to just an equal, if not more important, national process than an examination. Now, NASA's focus is not just no Safran Mofo, no Al-Ghurair or whatnot. Those really are just symptoms. NASA's argument is a process, the process. Can we guarantee ourselves as Kenyans a credible process? Can we trust the same people who messed this the election to carry out in the next 60 days to carry out, or within the next 60 days to carry out a credible process? No. What will have changed about these people? Same people, same brain, same hearts, same everything. And just one final thing to show you how callous these people are. What you've asked and Gabriel has answered on the kits, the KIMS kits. If and when you are managing such a sensitive, critical national process as an election, you surely do scenario mapping. What if, what if, what if? You do that. Right now, we are being shown that IEBC knew that the election will end on the 8th of August, and that would be it. That they never did scenario mapping, scenario planning. What if this happens, and what if this happens? What do we do? What are the options? That this is when they're now scrambling and saying, okay, oops, these kits would have to be reconfigured, but hold on a minute, there are court cases, so again there's evidence, these things may be used as evidence and so on. It just shows you the shallowness of the planning that was done by the people who were responsible. Right,
and we want to take a look at NASA's demands, their demands surrounding the fresh presidential election. Winnie, if you play those graphics for me now, I want to look at what exactly NASA is addressing surrounding this repeat presidential election, and indeed, of course, about who will be conducting this election. And there we have it. There you go. They are calling for repeat forms 34B. To reprint them. I can't quite make out what exactly those details are. The returning officers must resign. The forms must be standardized. Al-Ghurair should not print the poll documents. Reprint of Form 34Bs, that's among the demands. Repeat Form 34Bs, that's among their demands. Well, returning officers must resign. Standardized forms. And that Al-Ghurair should not print the poll documents. Stephen Mogaka, the back and forth from NASA, first it was the IEBC, now it is Al-Ghurair and OT Morpho. We have a 17th October date slated, and we still have a lot of complaints coming from their part surrounding this electioneering process. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are very simple. The Supreme Court did direct IEBC to conduct a repeat presidential election in strict compliance with the dictates of the Constitution and the statutory provisions and regulations that regulate the conduct of those elections. I think without more, we should not be listening to NASA. We should be listening to IEBC telling us they have done an internal review and found out that these are the deviations from the Constitution, these are the deviations on 8 August from the electoral laws and regulations, and these are the manner in which we are going to tackle them. So, in the absence of this kind of explanation from IEBC, we are leaving a vacuum which NASA is trying to fill. And I really want Lillian, the country, to wake up to the fact that some of the comments we hear that we are waiting for the Supreme Court ruling to tell us what was wrong with the 8th August election, I think this is a fallacy, because the body that is mandated to conduct an election is IEBC. And the Supreme Court, if ever it digs into the irregularities and illegalities that were brought before it, those were merely those that were brought before the Supreme Court by way of evidence. It may not be a comprehensive cover of what are the irregularities and illegalities that were committed. And this really should have come out from an internal review, an internal audit, and a management review of how IEBC conducted themselves during that 8th August election. And they should now be telling the actors and the country, especially the voters who wasted their time and money to go and queue and vote, that this is where we fell short and this is how we are going to go about it. So, with tremendous respect to NASA, they are also overblowing some of these issues, and these are some of the issues which they ought really to have given as a recommendation or as their proposal quietly to IEBC to look into and incorporate in the manner in which they are going to set themselves for this August election. To give credit to IEBC, they have invited stakeholders tomorrow, or I don't know when. Why don't we give them a chance to come up, perhaps, and tell the country and tell the actors that according to the Supreme Court judgment, this is where we find we fell short, this is how we intend to recover this position, and this is how we intend to give Kenya a credible, accountable, verifiable, and dependable election, whether on 17th or such a date that IEBC will tell the world that they are really, truly prepared to conduct that repeat election.
And Lillian, just to add on that, there's also, apart from what NASA is asking for, and I agree, I totally agree with Semeka when he says, allowing the same people to do the same election, using the very same methodologies, it's more like insane. But that does not nullify the fact that IEBC can go and look at how they were able to conduct this. It was not a perfect election, and I think we get it wrong when we push for anything less than perfection. We are going to have people who will not sign the forms. So when you're talking about irregularities, if it's the Form 34 which does not mirror another Form 34, that needs to be sorted out. That's not a big deal. If we give a firm, all right, the mandate to print a form, it must be the very same form which happens to be in Nairobi and in Mumias and in Nyandarua and in Kisumu. The form must be the same. So you need to sit down and ask, what went wrong? And I agree with Mogaka when he says that must be left to IEBC to discern where they went wrong. And it's not a hard task to do. You only need to also get an element of judgment from the Supreme Court to tell you these are the illegalities and the irregularities we are talking about. How fast can you fix them? Because let us all agree that if you go back with the same things back to Supreme Court, the case will be thrown out. So you need to sit down. And you need a guidance from the Supreme Court. Before Al Ghurair printed, was it not a directive from the courts of law? It was. They were allowed to go ahead after IEBC went to court and asked, kindly, let us know what you mean by public participation. And it went the full 9 yards. And they were given a go-ahead, in their matter procurement. And Al Ghurair was allowed to do that. So we cannot say we do not want Al Ghurair. What did they do wrong? Are we reading too much into this script? What can we accept as a fair election. At the end of the day, that is going to depend not on the people. And this is what I would like Kenyans to understand. What will precipitate a fair will be the person who loses. He's the one who will say this has been, and actually we know very well that is not going to come by easily. So the court must see, Supreme Court, if this case go back to Supreme Court, they must find it in themselves to say, at the very least, that which we were talking about in the previous determination about irregularities and illegalities have been covered. And I believe that's what I would like to see. They know very well, Justice Maraga knows very well, we will never have a perfect election. My good friend here knows we will never achieve anything called a perfect election. So what are we likely to all accept that this election has passed the threshold of being called success?
NASA is calling Simeha for a local firm to be contracted to carry out this process. If indeed Saffron is guilty of the fraud it's been accused of, would it be too much to actually tender a local firm to give this tender to a local firm to carry out this process within the time that we have?
I do not think it will be too much. And part of NASA's argument actually before the finalization of those cases at the High Court on the printing of ballot papers, part of the argument was that what is this very lovey-dovey relationship with Al Ghurair? Can this not be printed in this country? Because IEBC's argument, the chairman's argument was that they are hurrying to single source this Dubai-based firm, because of time limits, flights and I don't know what not and so on, shipment of those ballot papers and so on. And the argument then was, then why don't you single source a local company? You don't have to go to Dubai, because we have capacity in this country to do that. And to do it credibly and in an ethical way, putting in place all the mechanisms that the chairman has been talking about, like tracing of ballot papers, the presentation of the two parties in the process and so on. We can have it done locally instead of this very strange relationship the IEBC seems to have with Al Ghurair. You know, perception is such a powerful thing. When in the earlier days of when results, well, I think now they call them statistics, began to stream on television, there are certain things that the NASA leadership complained about to IEBC quietly in writing. And IEBC completely ignored until they held a press conference, deliberately so, to bring pressure to bear, that to let the public know that they have complained about those things quietly in writing. And IEBC completely ignored, did not respond. And then the chairman came to now finally to the public to acknowledge, oh yes, we've received, and yes, we will investigate. Up to today, the chairman has never come to tell us whether IEBC actually investigated the let's call them allegations, but now it's been proven it happened, hacking of the system and so on that NASA had raised. It is because of that experience that makes, oftentimes when we're dealing with public affairs, that makes people feel that if I've given you before this, brought this to your attention before quietly, and you refuse to keep quiet like it's a private tussle between you and I, the best thing to do then is to put it before the public, because it's not private between NASA and IEBC, it's very public. The things, I repeat, the things that NASA is asking for are not for the benefit of NASA. Even when they are done, they will benefit Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila Odinga, and any other person who in future contemplates running for political office. And finally, Gabriel, you say that we cannot have a perfect election. I dare say we can.
I don't think so.
I dare say we can. That we can actually have all presiding officers and returning officers simply please follow the procedures, fill those forms the way you're supposed to, and sign. What is so difficult?
I'll allow you to respond to that, Gabriel, and I'll also get Mogaka's thoughts on the same as we come back to close. Before that, let's cross over to Stephen Leto, who is in Parliament as the induction of members of the National Assembly continues here in Nairobi County. Let's listen in.
Thank you, Lillian. Like I told you earlier, is the second day of induction for members of Parliament, both the National Assembly and the Senate. Members of Parliament, members of the National Assembly converged in Nairobi, while 67 senators are at Simba Lodge in Naivasha, Nakuru County. But where we are now, we are seeing a lot of activities taking place. Members of Parliament, or National Assembly in particular, are split into several sections. Others going to, get some induction on issues committees. Others going on several issues including budgeting, house procedures, house immunity and privileges, and all that is what new members as well as old members are also being taken through here. But quickly, Lillian, we want to link up with several members of Parliament who have just come out of that particular session to tell us what has been their experience inside them, what has been taking place inside there, some of the places we have not been able to, get a glimpse or get ourselves into that place to hear for. So quickly, I'm joined by one of the MPs, that is the Member of Parliament for Kajiado North, the Honorable Manje. Tell us, you have attended the committee's induction that is almost being concluded. What can you tell us about the issues of committee formation? As we speak now, there is no single committee that is in place. Have members of Parliament submitted their names for various committees that they wish to be members of?
Okay. The importance of this function is that is like laying the stage for the committees, all right? Before a member chooses a committee, it's good to be told the importance of that committee and the area that maybe he's qualified in. We have covered different committees. We have the studying committees, oversight committees, ad hoc committees. The most important thing also is that we have been explaining the functions of each committee, all right? And also, we had an opportunity of getting a presentation from the director of committees, who has explained the functions of the directorate, and maybe the expenditure, what the members, how the members are expected to behave when they go outside the country, when they want to maybe visit other countries, and also how to collaborate with the senators to make sure that at least they make good of the committees and the work of the committees.
How soon are we expecting the committees to be in place now that Parliament is already in place?
Most likely by next week. Maybe by the end of this session, each member would have a preferred committee. Then I think we are also filling the committees that would like to fit. Personally, I was in Education Committee in last Parliament, and also I was in Public Accounts Committee, and most likely I want to retain the Public Accounts Committee and go maybe to another committee because I have done a lot in education in my county and also my constituency. Thank you.
Thank you, the Honorable Manje, the Member of Parliament for Kajiado North. Also, I'm joined in by the Member of Parliament, I think, Ureri. Yeah, tell us, you're one of the new members of the House. What is your experience that you have undergone in this induction? Do you think it has been helpful since yesterday?
Well, I think it is a necessary thing. It is quite helpful today. Personally, in the committee for, the unit where we're being trained on house rules. And basically, Parliament is a house of rules. It's just not about where you come and shout and call each other's names. There are rules of engagement. We're being taught on what rules we need to use so that we can bring honor to the house. So it's quite exciting. It's good to learn. We are learning how to formulate, the ideas that our people want us to change, and how to formulate them into bills and probably pass them eventually into laws and things like that. So it's quite exciting, I must say.
Thank you. Thank you. That is the Member of Parliament for Ureri, just giving us a glimpse of what is happening inside them. And of course, we'll be able to bring you up to speed of all the issues that will be taking place. We'll be able to speak, we will try to speak to the new members, more new members who are just concluding their induction on Friday, and what will be their field. But most importantly, in the afternoon, we'll be having the two security teams coming here, one led by General Kameru, and the other one by Joseph Boynet, the Inspector General, coming to address matters security. We will also be having former Head of Public Service and the current Taita Taveta University Chancellor, Dr. Sally Kosgei. She's also scheduled to address members of Parliament. Lillian.
Thanks for that. That's Stephen Leto, who is in Parliament as the induction of members of Parliament and the Senate continues. It's the second day of that. Here in studio, continuing with our conversation, Simeha, you are of the opinion that it is possible to have a perfect election. You disagree with Gabriel's earlier comments. Let's continue with our conversation.
Yeah, in this sense, I'm saying that it's possible to aim at having a perfect election and have it in accordance, because what is perfection? Because my definition of perfection with regards to election is standards that meet what is provided for in the Constitution, in the law, in the statutory provisions, and in the regulations. So if and when it says, just to give you maybe 2 examples, if and when it says what you call a result is a text message and an image of a form filled in the proper manner, stamped and signed, transmitted through that KIEMS system, what is so difficult about doing that? Why don't we just follow the procedure and the law? If it says that forms have to be standardized in this manner with those features, that they have to be equal, what is so difficult? So the mistakes, which are not just mistakes actually, are deliberate breaking of the law. Irregularities, illegalities rather, is breaking the law. Those, we can say we do not want that kind of standard in this country, and we can achieve it. So I don't want us to, I really do not like this thing of we are going to an election or any other national process and we are saying let us accept different standards. It reminds me of Isaac Hassan, one time saying that these are African standards, and it's so irritating. We can have our standard better than the US, Russia and Britain if we want to have our standard better. And we've laid it out there.
Unfortunately, they've not quite worked before.
And because we choose so. When you look at the Constitution, you look at the elections laws, all of them, and you look at the regulations, so far, they are beautiful. The rest, what you need to add on to it is just integrity, it's just competence, it's the will to do the right thing, and we would never be where we are in this country.
It's the same, actually, it's the same quote. I think it was the case with Joho versus somebody else. The same quote, said it is very hard to attain what you'd call a perfect process. So the focus of doubt was cast on 2 things. Was what was done deliberate? Or was it just a clerical error done without malice or prejudice? And I think that is where me and Semega probably will not agree on. He says we aim. That one we agree. His aiming is okay. Aiming for perfection is okay. It's just like what you say, aim to the sun, land on the moon. It is fine. We can aim that. But Lillian, we have to be alive to these 2 facts. Fraudulent, malicious, and just a clerical error of somebody who is not even without prejudice. For instance, and we were talking on when we were on another caption, somebody will not sign on the right place. And when I sit down with Prof, I'll ask him, Prof, do you agree with what this person has done? He has not signed in the right place, yet you can tell it's not malicious. Perfection will then be dictated by how Prof looks at it. Because he can say, well, really, I can understand. Or actually, it changes nothing, but yeah, I see he has signed in a place that is not, but we understand. All right? He can also look at that and say, no, that's not allowed. The whole form is nullified. All right? So it depends on how we define and look at perfection. If we are going wholly for perfection, we will never attain it because we'll have clerical errors, my friends.
Let me get Stephen's winding remarks as we close this topic. I think we're all in agreement that October 17th might not actually be the date of this election. By the look of things, we're looking at the fact that in the run-up to the August 8th general election, IEBC had 4 months to configure, test, and run a results transmission simulation of the kits. That's 4 months. They had exactly 4 months. So even if the commission has to beat the challenge of the kits supplier, there's still a lot of other issues. We've raised the issue of polling centers. Gabriel talked about that. Most of these polling centers are in schools. The school calendar is not going to change. Is it possible? Do you see the October 17th date being a reality, Stephen, as we close?
Lillian, yes and no. And as I said again, this by and large depends on the level of preparedness by IEBC. If indeed they have already been told by the supplier of kits that there's nothing they can do by that date, if, like in all other polling stations, there are several petitions, and I'm aware that several petitioners have made applications to preserve the kits that were used in the 8th August election, so that the data therein is required to be retrieved and brought in evidence in many of these petitions. So you can quite clearly see that the stock of the kit that IEBC has and the capacity to run elections in various polling stations is a major challenge, because you and I know that the Supreme Court did indicate that there were illegalities, and illegalities ordinarily call for legal sanctions, including arrest and prosecution of the perpetrators of those illegalities. So, we like it or not, certain individuals within IEBC are likely to be prosecuted, and if they are, and if that prosecution is before the polling day, those people need to be replaced and others trained, inducted to fill those vacancies. So the level of preparedness of IEBC is really what is going to determine when we are going to conduct this election, whether within 60 days or if it becomes absolutely necessary. Remember, the High Court did suspend the gender rule compliance, which is a provision of the Constitution. And if, for the sake of this country, if it becomes extremely necessary, and I know there is a suit in court challenging the capacity and the acceptability of IEBC conducting these repeat poll. We don't know what outcome will come out of that petition. So really, this country is a lot bigger than anybody else, and getting an election requires that election complies with the Constitution and the electoral laws. There is no shortcut. So the choice we have is whether to decide that we are ready, we go at it, or we go and bungle it again, and the courts will always be there to tell you, you did not comply with the Constitution and the law, sorry, go back at it.
We're hoping we won't bungle it again. And of course, we're going to be waiting for the outcome of the meeting between the IEBC and stakeholders, including both sides of the political divide. That's tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. I've been joined this morning by Stephen Mogaka, constitutional lawyer, Professor Joseph Simeha, and Gabriel Muthuma, political analyst. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. We're taking a short break. We'll be back with more in the next hour.